A police officer said, "Your wife reported you missing 3 months ago to collect insurance." The cop's hand was resting on his holster when he said it, like he thought I might run or pull a weapon, and I remember thinking how absurd that was, because I was standing in my own driveway, holding a bag of groceries I'd just bought from the Safeway 2 miles away. Officer Dennis Kowalski, according to his name badge, had pulled up while I was unloading my car at 4:38 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon in October, and his first words after stepping out of the patrol car had been, "I need you to put your hands where I can see them and identify yourself." I'd laughed, because I thought maybe someone had called about a suspicious person in the neighborhood, not realizing the suspicious person was supposed to be me. When I told him my name was Andrew Reeves and I lived here, his expression had shifted from cautious to confused, to something that looked almost like concern. Then he'd asked me to stay put while he made a phone call, speaking in low tones with his back turned for maybe 3 minutes before walking back over and delivering that impossible sentence about my wife reporting me missing 3 months ago to collect life insurance. I'd set the groceries down on the driveway because my hands had gone numb, and I'd stared at him trying to make the words make sense while a carton of eggs rolled out of the bag and cracked open on the concrete. I'd been living in a cabin in Montana for the past 4 months, working remotely on a software development contract that had required me to be off-grid for security reasons. The project was for a defense contractor building encrypted communication systems, and the terms of my employment had been explicit: no social media, minimal phone contact, limited internet access through secured channels only, complete focus on the deliverables with a substantial bonus for finishing early and maintaining confidentiality. My wife Vanessa had known about the job when I took it, had helped me pack for the extended stay, had driven me to the airport in July when I flew out to begin the contract work. We'd talked about how the money would change our financial situation, how the 6-month contract at $18,000 per month would let us pay off debt and build savings, and maybe finally take that trip to Europe she'd been wanting. She'd kissed me goodbye at the departure gate, told me she loved me and would miss me, but understood this was too good an opportunity to pass up, and promised she'd be fine managing things at home while I was gone. We'd established a communication schedule. I'd call her every Sunday evening using the secure line provided by my employer. We'd talk for 30 to 40 minutes about her week and mine, and she'd send emails through an encrypted portal when she needed to share anything urgent. The arrangement had worked smoothly for the first 2 months. Vanessa had seemed fine during our calls, maybe a little lonely but understanding, talking about her work as a dental hygienist, and updates on our friends and how she was keeping busy with yoga classes and book club meetings. She'd mentioned missing me, but never in a way that suggested she was struggling or having second thoughts about the arrangement. Our house was paid off, we had no kids, no pets, no major obligations that required both of us present, so there'd been no reason to think 4 months apart would be anything more than inconvenient. I'd finished the contract 3 weeks ahead of schedule, collected my bonus, and flown back to Seattle yesterday afternoon, planning to surprise Vanessa by coming home early rather than calling ahead. I'd taken a cab from the airport to a hotel, slept off the travel exhaustion, rented a car this morning, and stopped to buy groceries so I could cook her favorite meal as a welcome home surprise. I'd been imagining her face when she opened the door and saw me standing there, imagining the reunion after 4 months apart, imagining getting back to normal life together. Officer Kowalski was calling for backup, speaking into his radio about needing a detective and a supervisor at my address, and I was trying to process what he'd said about Vanessa reporting me missing. "There has to be a mistake," I told him, my voice sounding distant in my own ears. "I've been working in Montana. My wife knew exactly where I was. We talked every week. I can show you emails, phone records, everything." Kowalski's expression was professional sympathy mixed with skepticism. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay right here until my supervisor arrives. Don't go into the house, don't make any calls, just wait. Can you do that for me?" Something in his tone made it clear this wasn't a request, and I nodded numbly, sitting down on the curb, while he stood a few feet away, keeping me in sight. My phone was in my pocket, and I pulled it out, thinking I'd call Vanessa and clear this up immediately, but Kowalski moved closer and said, "I need you to put the phone away, Mr. Reeves. No calls until we sort this out." The supervisor who arrived 20 minutes later was Sergeant Linda Kravitz, 23 years with the Seattle Police Department according to her introduction, and she brought with her a detective named Robert Chen, who pulled up in an unmarked sedan and joined the conversation happening on my front lawn. Kravitz asked me to walk her through my story again, taking notes in a small notebook while I explained about the Montana contract, the communication schedule, the decision to come home early, and surprise my wife. Chen listened without interrupting, his expression giving nothing away, and when I finished, he asked if I had documentation proving I'd been in Montana for the past 4 months. I pulled out my phone and showed him emails from my employer, photos I'd taken of the cabin and surrounding landscape with timestamps, bank records showing paycheck deposits from the defense contractor, credit card statements showing charges in Montana for gas and groceries and supplies. Chen examined everything carefully, forwarding several items to his own email, and then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Mr. Reeves, your wife filed a missing person report on July 23rd, 3 days after you allegedly left for Montana. She claimed you'd gone hiking alone in the Cascades and never returned. She provided a detailed statement about your hiking plans, the trailhead where you'd parked your car, your typical route. Search and Rescue conducted a 5-day operation looking for you. They found your car at the trailhead exactly where she said it would be. The information felt like it was coming from a different reality, some parallel universe where nothing made sense. That's impossible, I said, hearing my voice crack. I was in Montana. I never went hiking. My car should be at long-term parking at the airport unless... I stopped because the implication of what Chen was saying was clicking into place. Vanessa had reported me missing while I was safely in Montana working. She'd claimed I'd gone hiking and disappeared. She'd planted my car at a trailhead to support her story. She'd gone through the performance of being a worried wife while knowing exactly where I was. Chen was watching my face as I processed this, and he said quietly, 3 months after you were declared missing, your wife filed a life insurance claim. The policy was for $850,000, taken out 8 months before you left for Montana. The insurance company is currently investigating the claim but hasn't paid out yet because they're waiting for the required time period to declare you legally dead. I felt like I couldn't breathe properly, like someone had punched all the air out of my lungs. Vanessa had taken out a life insurance policy I didn't know about, waited long enough that it wouldn't look suspicious, sent me off to Montana knowing I'd be unreachable and off-grid, reported me missing to start the clock on declaring me dead, and positioned herself to collect $850,000 when the legal process completed. She'd planned this, methodically, carefully, with attention to detail and timing. The woman I'd been married to for 6 years had decided I was worth more dead than alive and had set in motion a scheme to profit from my supposed death while I sat in a cabin in the mountains, completely unaware. We need to take you to the station, Chen said, and his tone had shifted from investigative to something that might have been sympathetic. We need to take an official statement, verify your identity, and figure out what the hell is going on here. Your wife is going to have a lot of questions to answer. But first we need to establish beyond doubt that you're actually alive and you've been where you say you've been. The police station interview room was windowless and cold, furnished with a metal table and uncomfortable chairs, and I sat there for 3 hours while Chen and another detective named Paula Simmons questioned me about every detail of the past 4 months. They wanted names of people I'd interacted with in Montana, receipts for purchases, descriptions of the cabin and the project I'd been working on, anything that could corroborate my story that I'd been alive and working while my wife was reporting me missing. I gave them everything, my employer's contact information, the cabin's address, names of the few local people I'd met at the grocery store and gas station, photos from my phone showing dated images of my work setup and daily life. Simmons made calls while Chen continued questioning me, verifying with my employer that I'd been on contract, confirming with the cabin's owner that someone matching my description had been renting the property, checking with Montana state records that my rental car had been registered during the time period in question. The verification process was slow and thorough, and I sat there answering questions and watching Chen's expression gradually shift from skeptical to convinced to visibly angry on my behalf. Your wife, Chen said carefully, filed the missing person report with a very convincing performance. She cried during the interview, provided details about your marriage and your habits, brought in photos of you and documentation showing your hiking experience. She organized search efforts, spoke to media, contacted your employer claiming she couldn't reach you. She played the worried wife perfectly. He slid a folder across the table, and I opened it to find photocopies of the missing person report, including photographs of Vanessa at the police station looking devastated, transcripts of her interviews, and documentation of the search and rescue operation. Reading her statement was surreal. She'd described me leaving for a solo hike on a specific trail, had claimed I'd been dealing with depression and stress from work, had suggested I might have had an accident or become disoriented. She'd even provided the name of a therapist she claimed I'd been seeing, someone who supposedly could confirm my mental state. Every detail was a lie, but it was a coherent lie, a lie supported by evidence she'd fabricated, a lie delivered with apparent emotion and conviction. Simmons returned to the room carrying printouts of financial records she'd requested while Chen was questioning me. We pulled your wife's bank statements, she said, spreading papers across the table. She's been spending money like she's already received the insurance payout. New car purchased 2 months ago for $68,000, paid in cash. Multiple shopping trips totaling over $35,000. A vacation to Mexico last month that cost $12,000. She's been accessing savings accounts and credit lines you both held jointly, draining them systematically. Your joint checking account had $87,000 in it when you left for Montana. It currently has $3,400. I stared at the numbers, trying to reconcile them with the wife who'd talked to me every Sunday about her quiet week and her normal routine. She'd been lying during every phone call, spending our money and waiting for me to be declared dead while pretending everything was fine. We need to bring her in for questioning, Chen said, standing up. But I want you to understand what's likely to happen here. Your wife committed fraud when she filed that false missing person report. She wasted law enforcement resources on a fake search and rescue operation that cost the county approximately $150,000. She attempted to collect life insurance through fraudulent means. She's been stealing from your joint accounts. These are serious crimes, and when we confront her with evidence that you're alive, she's going to have to answer for all of it." He paused, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. "The question is whether you want to press charges. You're legally entitled to, and frankly, what she did is both criminal and cruel. But I need to know if you're prepared to see your wife arrested and prosecuted, because once we start this process, there's no walking it back." I thought about Vanessa's face the last time I'd seen her at the airport, smiling and waving as I walked toward security. I thought about 6 years of marriage that I'd believed was solid and real. I thought about Sunday phone calls where she'd asked how I was doing and told me she loved me while simultaneously draining our bank accounts and waiting for me to be declared dead. "Yes," I said, and my voice came out harder than I'd intended. "I want to press charges. All of them. She tried to steal my life, and she needs to face consequences for that." Chen and Simmons drove to my house at 8:15 p.m. to arrest Vanessa, and they let me wait at the station rather than being present for the confrontation. I sat in the interview room drinking terrible coffee and imagining the scene. The doorbell ringing, Vanessa opening it expecting a package or a neighbor, finding police instead, the moment when they told her I was alive and at the station giving a statement about her fraud. Chen called me from his cell phone 30 minutes after they'd left, his voice tight with controlled anger. "She ran," he said shortly. "We knocked, identified ourselves, and heard someone moving inside the house. By the time we got around back, she'd gone out the rear door and was getting into a car. Patrol units are searching, but she had a head start. She knew something was wrong and she bolted instead of trying to talk her way out. The manhunt for Vanessa lasted 6 hours, ending when she was spotted at a gas station 40 miles south trying to withdraw cash from an ATM. The patrol officer who'd responded to the alert approached her calmly, confirmed her identity, and arrested her without incident. She was transported back to Seattle and booked on charges of filing a false police report, fraud, attempted insurance fraud, and theft. Chen called me again at 3:20 a.m. to tell me she was in custody and I could go home if I wanted, though he warned me the house might feel different now. I thanked him and asked if I could see her, talk to her, try to understand why she'd done this. He told me that was a terrible idea, that she'd been advised by the public defender not to speak to anyone, and that anything she said to me could complicate the case. "Go home," he advised. "Get some sleep. We'll need another statement from you tomorrow, and then you're going to need to find yourself a good divorce attorney because this is going to get complicated fast." The house felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. Everything exactly where I'd left it 4 months ago, except for the subtle changes that showed Vanessa had been living here alone. Her coffee cup in the sink, her jacket on the chair, her shoes by the door. I walked through the rooms in a daze, opening drawers and closets, finding evidence of the life she'd been living while reporting me missing. In the bedroom, I found jewelry I'd never seen before, expensive pieces that must have come from her spending spree. In her office, I found printed travel confirmations for trips she'd taken, including the Mexico vacation Simmons had mentioned and weekend trips to Las Vegas and Miami I hadn't known about. I found a card from someone named Derek thanking her for a wonderful evening with a date from 2 months ago. I found a stack of bills showing charges I'd never approved, purchases I'd never made, debts accumulated in my name while I was gone. The insurance company investigator called me the next morning while I was sitting at my kitchen table trying to process everything. His name was Mitchell Vance, senior fraud investigator with 19 years at Pacific Life Insurance, and he had questions about the policy Vanessa had taken out in my name. "Mr. Reeves, I need to verify some information about your life insurance policy. Did you sign an application for $850,000 in coverage last November?" I told him I'd never signed anything, never applied for life insurance, had no knowledge of any policy. Vance was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's what I thought. We suspected signature fraud but needed to confirm with you directly. Your wife forged your signature on the application, listed herself as sole beneficiary, and paid the premiums out of your joint account. When she filed the claim 3 months ago, our fraud detection team flagged it for investigation because the timing was suspicious. Policy taken out. You disappear less than a year later. Claim filed immediately after the 2-year contestability period ended. We were building a case to deny the claim when Detective Chen contacted us yesterday with the information that you're alive. We're withdrawing the claim denial because there's nothing to deny anymore, but we'll be cooperating fully with law enforcement on the fraud charges. I hired Margaret Thornhill as my divorce attorney, a family law specialist with 26 years of experience, who'd been recommended by Chen as someone who'd handled cases involving criminal fraud before. Thornhill met me in her downtown office overlooking Puget Sound and listened without interrupting while I told her the full story. Montana, the missing person report, the insurance fraud, the drained accounts, Vanessa's arrest, and current incarceration. When I finished, Thornhill leaned back in her chair and said, "This is one of the most egregious cases I've seen in my career, and I've seen some terrible behavior. Your wife didn't just betray you emotionally. She committed multiple felonies while attempting to profit from your supposed death. That gives us substantial leverage in divorce proceedings." She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "First, we file for divorce immediately on grounds of fraud and irreconcilable differences. Second, we petition the court to freeze all joint accounts and assets to prevent any further dissipation. Third, We pursue criminal restitution as part of her sentencing, requiring her to repay everything she stole. Fourth, we make sure the insurance company's fraud investigation documentation becomes part of the divorce record. And fifth, we do all of this quickly while she's still in custody and before she can hire expensive legal representation. The divorce filing happened within 48 hours, and the court granted a temporary restraining order preventing Vanessa from accessing any joint accounts or assets. By the time she made bail 3 days after her arrest, posting the $100,000 bond with money borrowed from her parents, she'd lost access to almost everything. The house was in both our names, but I'd been granted temporary exclusive use. The cars were registered jointly, but I'd been given temporary possession. The bank accounts were frozen pending final divorce settlement. She'd been arrested with $240 in her wallet and suddenly found herself financially isolated, facing criminal charges, and married to a man she'd tried to have declared dead. Vanessa's attorney, Dennis Crawford, reached out to Thornhill requesting a meeting to discuss settlement possibilities, and Thornhill advised me to agree, but warned me not to expect reasonable behavior. The meeting happened in Thornhill's conference room with both attorneys present, plus a court reporter to document everything said. Seeing Vanessa again was surreal. She looked smaller somehow, exhausted, wearing clothes I didn't recognize and avoiding my eyes. Crawford started by suggesting that perhaps we could work out an arrangement where Vanessa pled to reduce charges in exchange for cooperating with a quick divorce and fair asset division. Thornhill shut that down immediately. Your client attempted to defraud an insurance company out of $850,000 by having my client declared dead. She filed a false police report that wasted substantial public resources. She systematically stole from joint accounts while my client was working in Montana. There's no arrangement here except her pleading guilty to everything and accepting whatever sentence the prosecutor recommends. As for asset division, she's entitled to nothing. Washington is a community property state, but courts can award disproportionate splits when one party has dissipated assets through fraud or waste. She spent over $100,000 of marital funds during the 4 months Mr. Reeves was gone, and she'll be required to account for and repay every dollar. Crawford tried several other approaches, suggesting that Vanessa had been experiencing mental health issues, that she'd panicked and made poor choices, that she was willing to make amends. Thornhill responded to each argument with documentation, bank records showing systematic withdrawals, travel receipts showing luxury trips, the life insurance application with my forged signature, transcripts from her missing person interviews where she'd lied with apparent sincerity. Finally, Crawford turned to Vanessa and said, "I think you need to speak, because nothing I'm saying is helping." Vanessa looked at me for the first time since the meeting started, and I saw something in her expression that might have been regret, or might have been anger at being caught. "I panicked," she said, her voice quiet. "You were going to be gone for 6 months, and I realized I didn't want to be married anymore. I wanted out, but we didn't have money for me to start over, and I thought if you just disappeared, it would solve everything. The insurance money would let me start fresh. I didn't think about what it would do to you or your family or anyone else. I just wanted out, and I took the worst possible path to get there." The honesty was almost worse than the lies, because it meant she'd consciously chosen to destroy my life rather than simply asking for a divorce. "You could have just left," I said, breaking the silence I'd maintained throughout the meeting. "You could have filed for divorce and walked away. We don't have kids. We don't have complicated assets. You could have been free without committing multiple felonies." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing watching her cry. "I know," she said. "I know that now. But at the time I was thinking about money and how to set myself up financially, and I convinced myself this was the solution. I'm sorry doesn't even begin to cover it, but I am sorry. For all of it." The criminal case moved forward separate from the divorce proceedings, and I found myself testifying at multiple hearings about the timeline of events and the impact of Vanessa's actions. The prosecutor, Anne Devereaux, with 15 years in the fraud division, built a comprehensive case using the documentation Chen and Simmons had gathered: the false missing person report, the forged life insurance application, the financial records showing theft from joint accounts, the evidence of Vanessa's spending spree while I was supposedly missing. Devereaux called me to her office to discuss the case and ask about the impact Vanessa's fraud had had on my life. I told her about coming home expecting a reunion and instead finding police who thought I might be an imposter or a suspect. I told her about learning my wife had reported me dead and was waiting to collect insurance money. I told her about discovering our accounts had been drained and our savings depleted while I'd been working in Montana specifically to improve our financial situation. I told her about the psychological toll of realizing the person I'd trusted most had been willing to profit from my death without apparent remorse. Devereaux listened and took notes, and when I finished, she said, "Mr. Reeves, I want you to know I'm pursuing maximum charges and maximum sentencing recommendations. What your wife did wasn't a crime of passion or a mistake made in difficult circumstances. It was calculated, premeditated fraud that could have resulted in you being declared legally dead with all the complications that entails. I'm recommending 5 years in prison and full restitution, and I'm going to fight for every day of that sentence." The trial lasted 8 days, and I attended every session, sitting in the gallery watching Vanessa's defense attorney try to paint her as a woman who'd made terrible choices while experiencing a mental breakdown. The prosecution countered with evidence of her calculated planning, the timing of the insurance policy, the detailed lies in the missing person report, the systematic draining of accounts, the luxury purchases and trips she'd taken while supposedly grieving. They called search and rescue personnel who'd risked their lives looking for me on the mountain, testifying about the dangerous conditions they'd faced and the resources devoted to finding someone who'd never been missing. They called the insurance investigator who walked through Vanessa's fraud step by step, showing how she'd forged signatures and manipulated documentation. They called my former employer who confirmed I'd been in Montana the entire time Vanessa claimed I was missing. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts, filing a false police report, attempted insurance fraud, forgery, and theft. The sentencing hearing happened 6 weeks later, and Judge Thomas Blackburn heard victim impact statements before determining Vanessa's sentence. I gave a statement describing the betrayal and the ongoing impact on my ability to trust anyone, the financial devastation she'd caused, the stress of dealing with legal proceedings while trying to rebuild my life. Search and rescue personnel gave statements about the danger they'd faced during the unnecessary search operation. The insurance company's representative described the resources spent investigating what turned out to be obvious fraud. Judge Blackburn listened to everything, reviewed the sentencing guidelines, and imposed a sentence of 6 years in prison with credit for time served, 3 years of supervised release upon completion of the prison term, and restitution totaling $287,000, covering the money she'd stolen, the cost of the search operation, and the insurance company's investigation expenses. Vanessa cried while the sentence was read, and her parents cried in the gallery, but I felt only a cold satisfaction that justice had been served. The divorce was finalized 2 months after sentencing, with the court awarding me full ownership of the house, both vehicles, all remaining joint assets, and Vanessa's share of future restitution payments she'd be making from prison wages for the next several decades. The final decree dissolved our marriage and ordered Vanessa to pay additional civil damages of $50,000 for emotional distress, a largely symbolic amount given she'd likely never earn enough to pay even a fraction of what she owed. Thornhill called me when the decree was finalized and said, "It's over. You're legally single and financially whole, at least on paper. Actually collecting the restitution will take years, probably decades, but at least the orders are in place." I thanked her for her work and asked if cases like this were common. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Common enough that I'm not shocked anymore, but rare enough that yours will stick with me. Most fraud cases involve money or assets people can see. Your wife tried to erase your entire existence for profit. That's a special kind of betrayal." I sold the house 6 months after the divorce finalized, unable to live in a space that held so many memories of a marriage that had been built on lies I hadn't seen. The sale gave me enough money to relocate to Portland, start fresh somewhere Vanessa's crime hadn't been local news, build a life that wasn't defined by being the man whose wife tried to have him declared dead. I changed jobs, leaving software development for teaching at a community college, wanting work that felt meaningful and grounded in actual human interaction. I started therapy with Dr. Rebecca Norton, a psychologist specializing in trauma and betrayal, and spent 2 years working through the psychological impact of Vanessa's fraud and the trust issues it created. Norton helped me understand that my inability to see Vanessa's deception wasn't a personal failure, that skilled liars are often impossible to detect, that I'd had no reason to suspect my wife was planning to profit from my death because that suspicion requires a level of paranoia that makes normal relationships impossible. Vanessa sent letters from prison, forwarded through Thornhill's office because I'd blocked her from contacting me directly. I read the first few: apologies, explanations about her thought process, claims that she'd been desperate and mentally unstable and hadn't thought through the consequences. Later letters shifted tone, becoming angry, accusing me of being vindictive by cooperating with prosecutors, suggesting I should have just forgiven her and moved on. The final letter I read, about 2 years into her sentence, blamed me for ruining her life by coming back from Montana early, saying if I'd just stayed the full 6 months like planned, everything would have worked differently, and we both could have moved on cleanly. The victim blaming and complete lack of genuine accountability told me everything I needed to know about whether she'd actually changed or just regretted getting caught. I stopped reading the letters after that, instructing Thornhill to file them without forwarding them to me. The restitution payments trickle in irregularly, $30 or $40 per month from her prison wages, a symbolic reminder that she's serving time for what she did. At the current rate, she'll pay off maybe $15,000 of the $287,000 she owes over the course of her prison sentence and supervised release, leaving the rest as a permanent debt she'll likely never satisfy. The insurance company recovered nothing because Vanessa never received a payout to return. The county wrote off the search and rescue costs as a loss. I recovered some of the stolen money through asset seizure before the divorce, but most of it was already spent on trips and purchases that had no resale value. The financial losses hurt less than they might have because I'd earned good money in Montana and continued earning afterward, but the principle of it still stings. She stole from our future together to fund her exit from our marriage, and there's no making that right with monthly $30 payments from a prison commissary job. I'm 43 now, remarried to someone I met through friends who knew my full story before we started dating and chose me anyway. Christina teaches high school English and has a practical, grounded perspective on human nature that I find comforting. We've been together 3 years, married for 1, and we maintain separate finances with complete transparency because I can't do the joint accounts anymore, can't handle the vulnerability of shared money after what Vanessa did. Christina understands and doesn't push, doesn't see it as a lack of trust in her, but as a reasonable boundary given my history. We have a prenuptial agreement that she insisted on, wanting me to feel secure, and we build our life together with careful honesty about everything from finances to feelings to future plans. She knows I check documentation obsessively, verify information that most people would take on faith, struggle with anxiety when she travels without me. The scars from Vanessa's betrayal are permanent, visible in my behaviors and my boundaries, but Christina accepts them as part of who I am now. Vanessa is scheduled for release in 3 years with credit for good behavior, assuming she stays out of trouble. She'll emerge into a world where she's a convicted felon with massive restitution debts, unemployable in most professional fields, estranged from many friends and family members who couldn't forgive what she'd done. Her parents still visit her regularly, according to mutual acquaintances, maintaining a relationship despite their disappointment, but her sister cut off contact entirely after the trial. The friends we'd shared as a couple mostly distanced themselves from her after the truth came out, unable to reconcile the woman they'd known with the woman who'd reported her husband missing for insurance money. She'll rebuild some kind of life after release because people do, but it will be a smaller, harder life than the one she was trying to buy with my supposed death. I still have the news articles about the case, saved in a folder I rarely open. Local woman sentenced for faking husband's death. Wife collected $0 on $850,000 policy after fraud revealed. Search and rescue costs taxpayers $150,000 in false missing person case. The comments on the articles range from outrage to morbid fascination. Strangers debating what would drive someone to such elaborate fraud, whether mental illness was a factor, what my life must be like now. I don't engage with any of it, don't read the speculation, or respond to the occasional interview requests from true crime podcasters who want to feature the case. The story isn't mine to profit from or sensationalize. It's just the worst thing that ever happened to me, and I've worked hard to make it a smaller part of my identity, rather than the defining feature. The trust issues persist in ways I didn't expect. I verify parking lot locations when Christina says she's at the grocery store. I check flight confirmations when she travels for work. I monitor our separate bank accounts to ensure no unexpected transactions appear. I ask for documentation of plans and confirm details that should be taken on faith. Christina tolerates it with patience, understanding that these behaviors aren't about doubting her, but about managing my anxiety, and gradually over time the checking has decreased as new patterns of safety establish themselves. Therapy helped me understand that hypervigilance is a trauma response, that my brain is trying to protect me from being blindsided again, that healing means slowly reducing the checking behaviors as I build evidence that Christina is who she presents herself to be. 3 years in, I'm better, but not recovered. Functional, but scarred. Building a new life on foundations I check and recheck constantly to ensure they're real. The lesson I carry forward isn't that people are generally untrustworthy, or that marriage is dangerous, or that love is always a lie. It's that some people are capable of calculated cruelty that defies prediction, that the person you trust most can be hiding the darkest intentions, and that there's no foolproof way to protect yourself except to choose carefully and hope you chose right. Vanessa wasn't a monster in our daily life. She was funny and affectionate and seemed genuinely invested in our relationship. The fraud wasn't the result of obvious red flags I missed. It was the result of her deciding she wanted something different and being willing to commit felonies to get it. I couldn't have prevented it because I couldn't have predicted it, and accepting that is harder than blaming myself for being naive would be. What haunts me most isn't the financial loss or even the betrayal, though both sting. It's the image of Vanessa filing that missing person report, crying for police cameras while knowing I was alive and well in Montana, organizing search efforts for a man who'd never been missing, accepting condolences from friends while planning to collect insurance money from my supposed death. The cold calculation required for that performance, the complete lack of empathy for the people she was manipulating, the willingness to let searchers risk their lives looking for someone who wasn't lost. That's the part I can't reconcile with the woman I married. Either I never knew her at all, or something in her broke so completely that the person she became was unrecognizable from who she'd been. Neither explanation offers comfort. I visited the trailhead where Vanessa had planted my car, the place where search and rescue had started their operation looking for me. It's a beautiful spot, dense forest and mountain views, the kind of place I might have actually hiked if circumstances were different. I stood in the parking area where my car had been found and tried to imagine the search team setting out, working through dangerous terrain, hoping to find me alive, while I sat in Montana completely unaware I'd been declared missing. The waste of it all, The wasted resources, the wasted time, the wasted effort felt overwhelming. People had risked their lives for a lie Vanessa had told for money, and she'd let them do it without apparent guilt. That casual disregard for everyone except herself told me more about who she really was than 6 years of marriage ever had. I'm building a life that doesn't center around what happened with Vanessa, but it's a slower process than I'd hoped. The Montana contract that had been meant to improve our financial future ended up being the mechanism for Vanessa's fraud and our divorce. The money I'd earned is paying for therapy and legal fees and the construction of a new life in Portland, used for purposes I'd never imagined when I took the job. The irony isn't lost on me. I went to Montana to secure our future, and my absence gave Vanessa the opportunity to try to erase me completely. If I'd been home, if we'd struggled through financial stress together, if I'd never taken the contract, none of this would have happened. But it did happen, and somewhere in the wreckage I found the strength to testify and press charges and refuse to let her fraud destroy me completely. Vanessa will be released eventually, will serve her time and start over somewhere, will hopefully develop the capacity for remorse she lacked during the trial. Or she won't, and she'll spend the rest of her life blaming me for her consequences, rewriting history to make herself the victim of circumstance rather than the architect of fraud. Either way, I'm building a life she's not part of, with someone who knows my whole story and loves me anyway, in a place where the past is history rather than an ongoing trauma. That's what surviving looks like. Not erasing what happened or pretending the scars don't exist, but building something new despite them, choosing trust carefully while acknowledging it's always a risk, moving forward while carrying the knowledge that safety is never guaranteed, but life requires moving forward anyway. The detective who first told me about Vanessa's missing person report has become an unlikely friend, checking in occasionally to see how I'm doing, sharing updates about other fraud cases he's investigating. Chen sees patterns I can't, recognizes behaviors that predict fraud before it fully develops, and he's used my case as a teaching example for other detectives about the importance of thoroughly investigating missing person reports, even when the reporter seems credible. He told me once that Vanessa's fraud could have succeeded if I'd stayed in Montana the full 6 months as planned, that the timeline of her insurance claim was calculated to come just after the point where my death could have been declared legally, that she'd studied the process carefully enough to almost pull it off. She was smarter than most fraud perpetrators, he'd said, but she made the mistake most of them make. She assumed she'd thought of everything. She didn't account for you finishing early, didn't plan for the possibility that you'd come home before she'd completed the legal death process. That overconfidence is what catches them in the end. I'm not grateful for what happened. That would sanitize trauma into growth narrative in ways that feel dishonest. But I'm grateful I discovered the truth before Vanessa succeeded, before I was declared legally dead and faced the nightmare of proving I existed, before the insurance company paid out and the money disappeared into accounts I couldn't trace. I'm grateful for Detective Chen's thoroughness and Sergeant Kravitz's skepticism and the prosecutor's determination to hold Vanessa accountable. I'm grateful for the insurance investigator who flagged the claim as suspicious before anyone paid it. I'm grateful for the legal system that, for all its flaws, eventually delivered justice. And I'm grateful for Christina, who saw me at my most damaged and decided I was worth the effort of loving anyway. The story doesn't have a clean ending because life doesn't work that way. Vanessa is in prison serving her sentence. I'm in Portland building a new life. The restitution payments arrive irregularly. The trust issues persist, but slowly improve. The scars remain visible in my behaviors and boundaries. That's the real ending. Not justice transforming everything back to how it was before, but justice meaning she faced consequences while I survived and slowly rebuilt. She tried to erase me for $850,000 and failed. I'm still here. She's not. That's as close to winning as anyone gets in a situation this broken. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.